might be aware of this, on the climate crisis. I'm going to show one of these now. And it's entitled, "What Can We Do as a Church?" And I better take that back to be perfectly correct. It's John who's going to show it for me.
Oh, it's better.
Okay.
What advice would you give churches that want to do something together to combat the effects of climate change?
So the first piece of advice I would give to any community, any organization, and any church that wanted to address climate change is, and you won't be surprised when you hear me say this now, talk about it. Bond, connect, and inspire. Why is talking so important? Because surveys show that while the majority of us accept the fact that climate is changing, and we agree that it will affect future generations and plants and animals and people in developing countries, none of us think it will affect us, and we don't talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we act? People often say, well, talking about it, it seems kind of almost like a cop-out, such a low-key response to such a large global challenge. But here's the thing. Talking about it can be the first domino, in a good way this time, not a bad way. This study was released just this past year, and it found that talking about it, the simple act of having a conversation, initiates a true positive feedback effect. How? Well, first of all, the more we talk about it, the more we know. The more we know, the more concerned we are. The more concerned we are, the more we talk about it. And so, as they say, these findings suggest that climate conversations with friends and family enter into a pro-climate social feedback loop. What do we talk about? We don't talk about the science or how bad it is. We talk about why it matters to us and what we can do to fix it. And then there was another study that also came out this past year that I thought was so encouraging. It talked about how children can make a difference. They looked at children in North Carolina, which is a quite conservative state in the United States, and they looked at having those children, middle school children, receive education on climate change, but they didn't track the children's opinions, they tracked the parents' opinions. And what they found is that there was a significant difference in the parents' opinions after the children learned about the issue. That's pretty encouraging. So first is talk about it, and then second is act in community. And the good thing is this will give you even more to talk about. Because again, talking about it is so important, and we can talk about what we are doing, what we've done personally, what our church is doing, what other churches have done, what other organizations have done. Acting is important, but talking about how we're acting is also important. So how can we act in community? Well, here's just a couple of examples. So first of all, you can model good stewardship. Do an energy audit of your building. Figure out how to reduce your carbon footprint and your energy bills. Create a green team of like-minded people to explore ways to reduce your carbon footprint. Make your potlucks and coffee hours zero waste. Look at plant-based foods. And that leads to number 3, share resources. Often people aren't quite sure which light bulbs are most efficient. What type of travel is best? Do you have a solar panel installer you'd recommend? Encourage action. Provide resources for people that they can use. Facilitate information. Facilitate access to resources and facilitate access to change. And then step number 4, support organizations that care about climate change and reflect our values. Tier Fund is obviously one of those. Arasha is another one, Climate Stewards, Plant with Purpose, Operation Noah. All of these are organizations that embody Christian values, that embody the concepts of stewardship, of caring for the poorest and most vulnerable on this planet, and also preparing for the impacts of a changing climate and reducing our own contribution to the problem.
Thank you very much, John. We got there in the end, and I hope you found that of interest, because it does really stress how it all starts with having conversations. And it also, of course, in that video mentioned the Rocher, and they are the umbrella group of Eco Church. But again, I would stress the importance of talking. It's You can talk about it, which makes you set up your little group that you can go towards Eco Church. But it's important to continue talking so that you actually move on. Because I think sometimes it's very easy to stop. You've got one award, the talking stops, your progression might stop. But by taking the actions encouraged by Eco Church, you and your congregation are demonstrating that you care for creation, which is an integral part of loving your neighbour. It's also one way of playing a small but significant part in addressing the climate crisis. And as we found so starkly revealed this last year, what affects us in one part of the world affects us all. An Eco Church is a great way of working together with others in your local area. I'm aware that we have a mixture of people participating this evening, some who are very familiar with Eco Church, and others might not have even actually ventured forth onto the website. So very briefly, if you do go onto the Eco Church website, before you register, there is an opportunity to view the questions which are on the audit. So I would say, don't be put off when you first see this by its length and the number of questions, because remember that the people who are applying for gold have exactly the same questions as you. You may also find that personally you can only answer a few of the questions. So you might have to need to consult to others, your treasurer or people like that. Again, don't let put you off. Right, and then the survey, of course, has those who know about it, have 5 sections: worship and teaching, buildings, land, engaging with your local community, and lastly, looking at the personal lifestyles of the congregation. And again, I would say, particularly over when it comes to the land section, don't worry over ticking the not applicable one, because none of us are land owning rural churches. We are purely urban, and so don't have a lot of land to do things with. And finally, when it does come to the moment that you've gained an award, importantly, please, 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 celebrate it. Put it on your website, because I have had a look and not all that many people have put it on. And put it on your church notice boards if you have one. It's a great way of encouraging people in your neighbourhood to think seriously about what they might be doing on their own personal lives. Anyway, that is enough of me, and I'm handing over now to Paul, who is going to talk to us.
Thank you, Beryl. Well, I represent one of those churches that hasn't got an award yet. In fact, 2 churches, St Thomas Garrett's Green and St Richard's Lee Hall, both outer estate parishes, so neither of them particularly wealthy. In both churches, we've had a 2-pronged approach, as I'm sure most churches do. We've made certain commitments as churches, and then we've tried to encourage members of the congregations to make certain commitments as well. So to begin with, the church commitments, and first the early wins, the easy commitments. So early on at St Richard's, we committed ourselves to using no further plastic or paper cups or crockery or cutlery. St Thomas's, which used to serve all its Sunday coffee in plastic, moved to crockery as well. Early on, St Richard's also committed itself to using only eco-friendly cleaning agents. Then there's the slightly more difficult commitments, changing energy suppliers, partly because of fixed-term contracts, and at St Thomas's a very particular issue arose, which meant we've not been able to move forward as yet on that. And then there are the really difficult commitments, difficult because they require money. So St Thomas's has a large amount of window space in its worship area. The PCC has committed itself to double glazing it all, but of course it can only do this bit by bit by bit as money becomes available. St Richard's is a bit more fortunate. 4 years ago we did manage to install double glazing, although at the time the diocese asked if we could triple glaze, but we didn't have the money for that. The problem at St Richard's is the bell tower, a huge cavernous space over the worship area, which is entirely uninsulated. One side is just single layer polycarbonate. We've committed ourselves as a PCC to getting a second ceiling level built in there. The architect's plans have been drawn, approved, costed, but we just need £22,000, which we haven't got. So we're obviously dependent upon funding. Similarly, heating. St Richard's had to change its heating system in half of its building 2 years ago. We looked at green options, biomass boilers and so forth, but they were just too expensive. So we had to settle for a gas boiler and underfloor heating, better than what we had before, but not ideal. The obvious success story at St Richard's is the solar panels, which are on the roof. These were installed courtesy of Power for Good, which you heard reference to a week ago. And because our building is used 7 days a week, 5 full days a week, this has proved absolutely invaluable. St Thomas has also looked at solar panels, but that's not possible to move forward at the moment on those. So that's the church commitment. Now, what about encouraging congregations individually to get involved? Well, in addition to obviously climate change featuring in sermons and intercessions, both churches have had special services and have, dear, that's my front door. Now, that would happen, wouldn't it? I'll try and ignore it. Both churches, in addition to having it feature in sermons and intercessions, have also had special services given over to the subject, informing and educating congregations and helping them to see that it's their Christian duty to take action. So, for example, in one service, around the church, we had tables set up with displays and examples of the sorts of commitments that people could make, and people were invited to move around and sign up to commitments, or indeed come up with commitments of their own. It was interesting to see which commitments people did make. Unsurprisingly, perhaps the most popular was to reduce use of plastics. Also quite popular, more surprisingly maybe, was people suggesting they would eat less meat and less dairy. How they've done on that remains to be seen. I'll come back to that in a moment. Also interesting to see the commitments people didn't make. So only one person committed themselves to turning down their heating thermostat at home. Only one said they would switch to green energy. Cost, probably the problem there. Only one said they would buy more British products. In fact, at St Richard's, we tried to introduce a scheme where people collectively could buy fruit and veg from a local farm, but it didn't work. I think partly because of cost, and partly because the fruit and veg didn't look as appealingly presented as it does in Lidl and places. Now, how have people kept to their commitments? Well, the answer to that is we're about to find out. I have to say, COVID in the last 15 months has put this onto the back burner. But we have got services, and in a few weeks' time, we will know a little bit better as to how people have been doing with their commitments. We're probably also going to use questionnaires, I think, at St Richard's as well. I think that's probably my time allotted up, so I'm going to now pass on to Janet.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I'm doing a double act, so I'm going to hand over first of all to my comrade, wherever she is.
You're mute at the moment.
I'm here at the top.
Yeah, go. There you go. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ruth Clark. I'm a member of the St Lawrence PCC and the lead for the Eco Church programme that we're doing there. Janet, you're going to ask my first question.
I am indeed. Thank you, Ruth. So, as Christians, we know it is imperative that we take climate change seriously, but there's more to it than that, isn't there, Ruth?
Yes, yeah. One of our missions as Christians is to care for God's earth, to live sustainably and ethically in our individual lives and in the lives of our churches. And the Eco Church programme is part of that process, taking the message out into the wider community. But not only that, having been on the last few sessions, it's becoming obvious that our mission should also be to take the lead in planning and putting into action how we address the problems of poverty, inequality, which in of themselves need to be tackled, the sense of entitlement and privilege that exists within certain sections of society, which over the generations and into the present have contributed to the climate change crisis and continue to do so. We're now starting to see how Christian aid and fair trade production are coming together with the same message of working towards climate justice. And we should be looking towards taking part and accelerating that process. So would you like my question now? I have one for you.
Indeed, absolutely.
Right, we've got our bronze award, and I'd like you to tell us what you found good or what we found good about the whole process.
Thank you, Ruth. Well, I must admit, as we embarked on this, I wasn't quite sure how it would go down with the congregation. So for Lent 2018, I set a challenge of, I wrote on a bookmark things you could do. And every time anybody did any of them, they put a bean in the relevant jam jar on the side altar. And during Lent 2018, between us, we did 731 actions. So, and we really encouraged each other by seeing the beans keep increasing, and people snuck into church at strange times to add them. And there were things as simple as buying fair trade coffee, because that counts towards your eco church, taking the bus or a walk instead of going by the car, feeding the birds. Not many people, I have to say, did an energy audit at home, but we got an idea that a lot of people were really behind this. So then we got onto the questionnaire, and we found it really easy and very motivational, because they have these lovely little dials which tell you where you're up to. And you can see that you're maybe nearly at bronze. Now, if you tick a few extra boxes for things you haven't done, listen carefully, you'll see the dial go higher, and you'll be starting to see what you need to do to get your next level. And then you need to go back and untick those. No cheating. But we found it much easier and much clearer, and a lot of support. So Ruth is going to tell us a bit about the support that's available for us.
Yes, Russia, which is the worldwide Christian charity, initiated the programme. And I found them very supportive in many ways. They keep me informed with regular updates on their progress, various work they're doing, seminars via links with Eventbrite on relevant topics. And you can email and phone them, and they always get back to you. They're there for support. So don't be afraid to approach them if you're struggling. Also, the Church of England, obviously that's looking at its role in tackling climate change. There's a lot of very informative information on their website. We particularly found the seminar on lighting very useful, as we're in a stage where we're doing upgrading our lighting, and they're going to be doing a heating seminar as well. So the links in with the Church of England website, can help you further on with knowing what you're looking for and how they're working with climate change as well.
Super.
Yeah. Oh, I've got my question for you. Last question. Anything that we wish we'd known about the process when we first started it?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, quite a few things. I mean, I can't stress how easy and motivational it is. It just keeps encouraging you to do that little bit more. And us all doing that little bit more is vital. Ruth doesn't even know this, but I went into the churchyard this week and thought, oh, the blossom on the ground looks like confetti. So I've been collecting it up, and I've just about perfected how to air dry it so that we can recycle it for brides in the year to come. Now, you just start thinking out of the box and what you can do. Now, when we got through the questionnaire and we got everything on bronze, we were really excited. So we went to the audio certificate, and at that point, we were asked for a donation from A Rocher, which is absolutely fair enough. They are a charity, and I had been wondering how they were funded. And they give you an idea of donation depending on the number of people in your church. but it would have been really helpful to have known about that earlier on so that we could budget for it. Anyway, we managed to get around that and we got our certificate, but we didn't buy any of the plaques they offer. And the other thing is just how much it all is coming together. A lot of us here I recognise from other sort of forums on justice and fair trade and all the rest of it. And this is all coming together. This year's Christian Aid Week is all about climate change, as was the Fair Trade Fortnight. And I think for some of us, we're thinking, well, I preached my first sermon about using ecological washing up liquid in the 1980s. And for those of us who've been leading on this for a while, we think, gosh, it's getting boring. But I remember going to a seminar once when it said, when the leaders think it's getting boring, other people are only just beginning to think it's relevant. So we mustn't get bored. We must continue. So let's continue and go to the church, which is not just bronze, but silver.
Oh, that was St Lawrence Northfield.
Yeah, that's Janet, she preached at Stan's.
Janet Chapman.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, it's my turn now. Just to let everyone know, if they could mute themselves, because then they won't appear on the screen when I'm talking, even though it might be more interesting. Also, just to let you know, I'm going to be screen sharing, but if it doesn't work at the end, I'll be turning my computer off and rejoining so Chris can carry on. So let me give this a go. Bear with me. So I'm Simon Slater. I worship at St Christopher's in Spark Hill, and I basically got 4 slides which I'd like to share with you, but don't appear to be working. So we're a very diverse congregation. We're a diverse set of buildings, and let's just try this again. Bear with me. Here we go. So hopefully you can see this now to give you a bit of idea of what's going on. So there we are at the edge of Spark Hill, a diverse congregation, a real mixture of buildings in terms of a vicarage, a church hall, no church tower, unfortunately. Didn't get around to building one. And also a lot of use in those buildings. We've got a church charity, a congregation, a separate charity, lots of things going on in that space. And really, why did we do Eco Church? I suppose, like many of you, you've already been doing this for years. And so we were looking for a framework. So we were doing lots of interesting things. I've already taken lots of notes of things I'm going to borrow from other people, but reducing waste. We did some low energy light bulbs, which we gave out to our basic Bible study group saying, this is years ago, please use these in the rooms you're using for your Bible studies to sort of reduce energy. Done litter picking for the local mosque. Our vicar's delighted that he doesn't have to mow the bottom of his garden because we get extra points for wildlife, so that's brilliant. And also our charity's been, before COVID, was doing a place of welcome where near date food from local supermarkets has been used for community kitchens and feeding up to sort of 40 or 50 people. But we needed a framework, and we've only just done this recently to stick all those pieces into a picture so we knew we were doing the right things. And that's why we looked at the Eco Church framework. We wanted something that covered more than climate change, included all the aspects of church life, not just buildings, and could be tailored to whether you're a small church or a sort of higgledy-piggledy selection of buildings like us. So we found it really useful. And just to echo the sort of previous speakers, it's well worth a look. You can tailor it. It's a good process. In terms of what we did, you can see there, that's the sort of score. We did exactly the same as Northfield. We played around and worked out, could we get better scores or not, or what do we need to do? And that's really helped us to think about what to do next. And you can see how we score there. We're pretty good in worship and teaching, but actually the lifestyle stuff that others have talked about, we need to do a lot more work on encouraging our congregation. So we did the survey. We consulted with the children in our group, in our church, using Duplo, as you can see there. We consulted about adults, saying, look, these are the areas we're weak on, where can we put the effort? And then we went to the church council and we agreed a budget allocation from our mission budget. And given we're from an evangelical tradition, this is significant for us to say, this is part of the marker mission that recognised by the Church of England. This is important for us, what we're doing. We did an action plan. So I'm the eco champion. I'm meant to report back on other actions every 6 months. And then we submitted our application and we got silver basically the first month of COVID. And I think that's been one of the issues about keeping the momentum up, as well as was been mentioned. We're going to do a sort of churchyard survey. We've switched gas suppliers, which was a complete pain. But we found it a very useful process. And I think what we learned is don't do it alone. You know, we'll get a small group as mentioned, work within the church, see it as a central part to the church's mission, involve the church council. That was definitely helpful. And also there's a temptation to try and do too much. And I think, you know, we're behind on our action plan, but if we can keep making a couple of steps each year and reporting back progress, and we're rubbish about publicising it, it's not on our website at the moment, I think that's key as well. And I suppose the other reflection is I do some of this work in my sort of work life, and it can be a technical exercise, and it is really important to allow God in, to see what the priorities for your church are and community, and just say, this is all I've got. Please take it and do good with it. And I think that's really important, because it can be driven by guilt or being overwhelmed. And actually, this is a really good process of saying, this is what we've got. This is what we can do. Please help us. So that's a sort of short journey. It looks a lot neater and 4 sides than 10 years, I can tell you. But over to Chris now. You're going to hear about what it looks like about being a gold award winner.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, so I'll start again. Sorry about that. Thank you for inviting me to speak this evening. I'm Chris Martin from Cotteridge Quaker Meeting. I've been very involved with our sustainability work and also in our wider area meeting and national Quaker work. Sustainability and care for the earth have long been concerns for Quakers. In 1772, John Woolman wrote, "The produce of the earth is a gift from our gracious Creator to the inhabitants, and to impoverish the earth now to support outward greatness appears to be an injury to the succeeding age." Care for creation and climate justice also lie at the heart of Quaker testimonies to peace, truth, simplicity, and integrity. Cotteridge Quakers' journey to gold started in 2004, drawing spiritual and faith inspiration from a national Quaker Living Witness initiative. We obtained an Eco Congregation Award, the predecessor to the Eco Church scheme, in 2011. Our Eco Church journey has 2 distinct phases, going direct to silver and then moving on to gold. Going direct to silver was 7 years of making our meeting house more energy efficient. The meeting house and warden's bungalow were built in 1964. They were cutting-edge architecture at the time, but dismal in terms of sustainability and energy efficiency. The Living Witness group became a project team. We did a lot of work on fundraising for insulation, heat pumps, and solar PV. We had to innovate. The experience we gained was shared with other Quaker meetings and churches. In 2017, we committed as a meeting to work for a Gold Eco Church Award. We already scored high on buildings and wider engagement, where we were very involved with climate justice, divestment work and promoting the eco-church scheme throughout the area meeting. To achieve gold, we needed as a meeting to tackle the other 3 areas. Worship and teaching. As Quakers, we do not have sermons, hymns, or liturgy as such, but we do have very regular ministry in our meetings for worship on the environment and climate justice. We found the eco-church team very helpful and used the additional boxes on the eco-church form to explain how we worship as Quakers. Land. We gave our small garden a makeover so that it was a place for spiritual reflection, insect-friendly, and importantly, a space for the early learners group that uses the meeting house during the week. Lifestyle. We found this a challenging area as most Quakers are very independent-minded and do not respond well to being told what to do. We concentrated on activities that raised awareness. Our children did a travel to survey meeting. We held a vegan-themed autumn open day. We formed carbon conversation groups and played carbon emission games. The sustainability group has encouraged members and others to adopt more sustainable styles by increasing awareness and education, helping each member find their own way forward. Very detailed information on how we made our gold claim is available on our website. It illustrates how eco-church scheme activities pervade the life of our Quaker community. Although the Gold Eco-Church sets a high standard, I would like to emphasize that it can be reached in different ways. A couple of years ago, I went to a presentation by St. Catherine's Anglican Church, Burbage, near Hinckley, and was struck by how different their approach to obtaining a gold award was to ours. So if an Anglican church is considering moving to gold, I would suggest to build on particular strengths and interests and look closely at what other gold holders have done. So we've learned much as a Quaker meeting by taking part in the eco-church scheme. Based on our experience, I think my main messages to Anglican churches are as follows: to align with your Christian faith, to have an active group that has the support of a wider congregation, share experience and work with others, involve your children and young people, don't reinvent the wheel, use frameworks like eco-church, and at all times recognize the perspectives and priorities of others, which may not be the same as yours. Thank you, and please visit our website. I hope my presentation has helped you on your journeys to gold.
Thanks very much, Chris. Could I remind you, please, to mute yourselves? We're just getting a little bit of background noise sometimes. Thank you very much. Well, thanks ever so much to all those speakers on eco-church, very inspiring. I think the answer to confetti is not even to bother drying it, but just to use petals. I think they've been doing that in France forever, really. But anyway, that's just my tip. I think that some important themes are coming out, and particularly the theme of sharing and networking and a small group just constantly talking and spreading the message. And I think also that theme of small incremental steps. And not to try to do too much all at one go, but to build slowly. So I think there's some big themes. I'll invite you, we're having a few minutes of chat now. I'm going to pick up some questions from the chat. And I'd invite you, please, to use the chat to put in some more questions if you've got them, or just to try and grab my attention by waving or putting up the little electronic hand. So I'm going to take one question first of all for Simon, straight off the chat. How did you use the Lego and Duplo, Simon? Can you just say a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's fine. It's someone in the congregation's idea. It was really, really good in terms of it's a big plastic box, and then you put a Lego house in it, and then you had the children sitting around, and we sort of talked about creation, God creating a world for us to live in. Then we did various things like not look after it and create pollution, which meant putting loads of Duplo in, crowding out the house. And then we asked them individually to work and say, what sort of things could we do as a church to help God's planet, and what sort of things could we do as individuals? And for every suggestion they had, they got to take a bit of Duplo out and write on a post-it note. So it's sort of quite a nice thing to illustrate the point of what we can do. It's a good way to get lots of good ideas from them. So yes, that's the idea anyway.
Great,
I like
good idea. Yeah.
Yes, well, I'm going to borrow the beans idea though. That's very good.
We're all into the beans. We're keen on the beans. Yes, I made note of that. Yes, and did you find quickly, Simon? Did you find that children really are a driver very often of climate action, as it's suggested in the film we saw earlier?
I think so, but I think also the children in our group would say, please don't just lump us in one group as all eco warriors. Yes, they are. Yes, they do like the environment, and yes, they are concerned. But some of them are sort of not so concerned because they're all different. But they're a lot more, I think, educated and understanding what's going on. So yes, we're about to get a young person onto our church council who'll be mentored, and actually, to be quite honest, it's really good to get a different range of voices, and that will be useful for us as well.
Absolutely, top tip there. Thank you very much, Simon. Can I also ask? Carbon emission games, Chris. What are carbon emission games?
Well, they're activities where you have to estimate and compare different sources of emissions, and it's educational. And I'll send Hilary some links and some information, and I can send it to Beryl as well, for more wider distribution. But some of them we developed ourselves, or a member of the meeting developed them.
That sounds great, Chris. And just while we're on that, probably another one for you, Chris, because you've gone a long way with solar panels, but maybe other speakers would like to come in on this. But there is a question in the chat about essentially about the carbon emissions of solar panels themselves, particularly when they come to the end of their life. There is always the question of embedded carbon. Do you have a view on that slightly tricky question?
We did not do the calculations to include embedded carbon. We were looking at running costs. Quite a lot of the learning that we obtained from the work on Cotteridge Meeting, we then applied to our own personal house. And again, we looked at carbon running costs, as it were. I think that the fact is that Cotteridge Meeting now generates more electricity than it uses. It's gone from, I think, 12,000 kilowatts of consumption a year to a net production of 3. So I think that that over a 25-year life of the panels, I've seen no evidence that the embedded carbon is a significant part of the equation.
Thank you, Chris. Yes. Okay. These tricky tech questions.
Can I just answer on that one as well? Thanks. There's if you go to the Church of England's Environment Programme website, they've done lots of really good webinars. I've just listened to one recently. They talked about solar panels, and it's really good about how to fit it on your church, why you should do it or why you should not do it. And also they talk about the embedded carbon as well. And again, I think we've got power to good for good here as well. We've done lots of work. So there's lots of expertise around.
We have, including John Hayward. John, do you want to just come in for a moment there before we move on and just say something about that, John?
Well, yes, I'm not a great technical expert. Something I've just put in the
Yeah.
in the chat is that one way of making a slight reduction on the embedded carbon on your PV panels would be to buy ones that have been made in Germany rather than China.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And apart from that, you know, I can't think of
no
a lot of ideas in, but you know, it's always very difficult to keep on adding the embedded carbon to everything.
Yeah.
And of course, we haven't had panels reach the end of their working life yet, and we're expecting that they will do longer than the 20 years that the feed-in tariff is going to be paid. So you know, they should keep on, although their efficacy does reduce slightly year on year, they should go on beyond that 20-year mark, and you know, at a level.
Yeah, thank you, John. Now there are interesting questions coming through on the chat, but I'm not going to take them at the moment because of time, really. I'm going to move on now to back to Paul. Paul, your second slot today. You're going to tell us about Malawi. Over to you.
Righto, thank you very much. So, according to the 2021 Global Climate Index, Malawi is one of the 10 countries in the world most affected by climate change. 5 of the last 9 harvests have been poor, either because of too much rain, floods, or too little, drought. So, I will now attempt to show some pictures. Has that come up? I'm not quite sure whether it has or not. There we go. How do I get rid of the pictures on the side?
I think you're okay.
That's it. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I was trying to get rid of the pictures of the rest of you so I could see the controls. Right. So here are some pictures from 2015. And to begin with, from our own church's partner parish. This is Catherine, Mothers Union member, with one of the grandchildren that she has care of outside her home. Well, the home doesn't look great to start with, but if you go round the back, you'll see it's worse because there's a floor-to-ceiling crack. Why? Because in 2015, the rains caused the water table to rise so much, it simply destabilised all the land. But Catherine was lucky because a quarter of a mile down away from her was the house of another member of the Mothers Union, Egret, and that house simply collapsed altogether. And she was actually in it at the time, but fortunately was unhurt. And a couple of parishes away, there were simply scores of houses, all of which had simply collapsed because of the destabilising of the land. And in the same year, this was Manis, aged 11, on her family land near the southern border with Mozambique. And what happened here was the nearby river flooded, and in the whole of the surrounding area, all the nutrients were washed away, so nothing could be grown on the family land. And that was 2015. In 2019, Cyclone Idai hit, and exactly the same results. Houses demolished, or very substantially, and yet people were still using them. Schools, likewise. Health centres, doesn't look like a health centre, does it? But health centres collapsed as well. And again, agricultural land hit very badly. This is from the area of Mangochi, linked to Polesworth Abbey. And again, floods simply washed away all the goodness from the soil, leaving it impossible to grow anything. And of course, it threatened people's very lives. This is Dorothy, who is disabled, hasn't got a wheelchair, very nearly lost her life. She was just about carried to safety when her house suddenly went underwater. Now, of course, it's true that Malawi has always had occasional bad harvests, but it's the regularity of them in the last decade that has been unprecedented. And that's why, and these people are why, that we have to take climate change seriously in our country. Now, is there anything in particular we can do to help Malawi survive climate change? One of the biggest contributory factors to climate change in Malawi itself is deforestation. 36% of the forest cover was lost in the 40 years after 1972, and that is continuing. And why? Well, first of all, cooking practices. 97% of all cooking in Malawi is done with charcoal or firewood. This firewood is outside the kitchen at a secondary school. It will last not even a term. And why else? Building materials. 95% of buildings are constructed from soil bricks that again have to be burnt with firewood or charcoal. So what can be done about this use of firewood and charcoal? Well, in terms of buildings, it's not so difficult. These bricks are being used to construct a new diocesan HQ in northern Malawi, and they require much less firing than is traditional. And these bricks are being made by an Anglican project also in northern Malawi, and these don't require any firing at all. There is some hope of progress there. Cooking, however, is much more problematic. Christian Aid has been encouraging the use of these more efficient stoves, which use charcoal and firewood, but less of it. The government is investing in schemes that are going to use animal waste and even human waste to try and produce biogas for cooking. But we'll see what happens with those ideas. Nobody much, for some reason, is considering solar cooking. In Birmingham, we've asked Southern Malawi produce a costed plan for developing solar-powered cooking as a secondary school in Southern Malawi. For the reasons already explained in the Tier Fund video and mentioned already, if children can see solar cooking in action and that it works, hopefully they will spread the word in their families and in the community, because education is what is needed to change people's habits of a lifetime of using charcoal and firewood to cook. We've asked them to produce a plan, but I have to say they're struggling to produce a plan. There just doesn't seem to be much expertise around. Secondly, and more generally, only 11% of people have access to electricity in Malawi, but most of the electricity there is non-renewable. And again, given the abundance of the sun, that seems daft. The government is, at government level, there are 2 new solar plants being developed with money from, you've guessed it, China. One of the 4 dioceses has been looking at creating a solar farm with money from Israel, but that seems to have fallen through. What we do in Birmingham, a few years ago, a number of parishes purchased or gave money for these portable solar lamps, especially for use in schools. Now, I'd like to say they've made a big difference. They have made some difference, but I also have to say quite a number of these lamps have gone walkabout. So now we're exploring portable solar panels. For various reasons, it's thought that portable might be better than fixed. We're running a trial of these in a primary school. We'll see. If it's successful, then we'll roll that trial out more generally, because these are reasonably affordable. And we could support Malawi in this way, but again, there is the danger of theft. This might not work. Thirdly, water harvesting, rain harvesting. I mean, a very simple idea, but this is a very rare example, and that's my phone. It was the front door on my first talk. This is a very rare example of water harvesting, water being taken off the corrugated iron roof and then put into big tanks under the roof. At the point at which the photograph was taken, this was only being connected up. If it's successful at this school, then again, this is something we might want to try and roll out more in Malawi. And then fourthly, farming methods. Maize is by far the majority crop in Malawi, but maize is less resilient to drought than most crops. It's also more vulnerable to a pest called armyworms. So diversification and intercropping is needed.
Paul, I'm going to stop you for a second. Can everybody just check that they have muted, please? We have got a bit of background noise.
It's my own answer phone.
Oh, it's you?
Yes, it's my own, and my phone went, and now a message is being left on it. the hazards of working from home, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, Paul. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just while I've interrupted you, perhaps if everybody does just double check that everybody else is muted.
I'm interrupted by my own message.
I know. I'm sorry, Paul. And what you're saying is so interesting. Thanks a lot. Yeah,
So I don't know quite how much of that was missed, but farming methods. Maize is the main crop, but it's less resilient to drought, and it's also more vulnerable to armyworms. So diversification and intercropping is greatly needed. Now, two dioceses set up model farms a few years ago. Again, sadly, I have to report both 4 farms have fallen into disuse. So, coming out of screen share. Oh, there we go. There we are, coming out of screen share. Malawi is one reason why we do need to take climate change seriously, but it's also an illustration of the fact that although there are things we can do to help our brothers and sisters in the 2/3 world to become more resilient to climate change, actually it isn't straightforward. There are challenges there. And I think it's now over to Patrick, who hopefully won't get interrupted by a front door or his own telephone.
Hello, so it's Patrick Gerard here. I'm expecting to see my face appear on the screen, but it's not happening just at the moment. Can you hear me? You can hear me? Oh, well, I'm going to, yeah. Even if I'm not seeing what I expect to see.
I can see you, Patrick. Can other people see Patrick?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I couldn't, but there we are.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating evening, absolutely fascinating evening. I'm particularly delighted to see that presentation about Malawi. I mean, there was some real learning points for me in that. And I think that's an enormously valuable presentation. We really need to make that much more widely available. It's also been wonderful to hear from the different stages of eco church. So my own, I've got 2 churches. One of them hasn't even registered yet, although I think it will do. And I think if it does register, it will get bronze quite quickly. The other one's on bronze and beginning to think about silver. So we're on that same journey as many other people are. Now I want to talk briefly about the Church of England nationally and what that's the sort of national approach to the climate change problem, a little bit about Birmingham, and just a little bit about how things have changed since I've been environmental advisor for the bishop. So let's start with the C of E nationally. I mean, I've always been very impressed with how seriously the C of E nationally has taken the climate change issue. And in fact, not just the climate change issue, but also the biodiversity loss issue and other related environmental questions. But there's a group called the Environmental Working Group, which is a very senior body. It's chaired by the Bishop of Salisbury, the Right Reverend Nick Holton. He's just about to retire. So there's a handover in progress at the moment to the Bishop of Norwich, Graham Usher, who will be chair of the Environmental Working Group. But it's a very high level group. There are 2 other bishops, Malcolm Brown, who's the top man in Mission and Public Affairs, is there. Becky Clark, who's the Director of Buildings for the Church of England, is there. And that group sets the policy, really, for the Church of England, or proposes to General Synod what the policy should be. And it's a very impressive group. I tend to find that if I ask a question, usually that question has been thought through very carefully already, and you get a very well-considered answer. It's a very impressive group. And then at Church House, Westminster, the main offices of the Church of England, there are 2 people who work, both of them are part-time, but they must be at least 3 or 4 days a week, Catherine Ross and Joe Chamberlain. And they work on the more hands-on aspects of addressing all the various challenges of climate change. And the scope and variety and depth of the things they do really, really impresses me, especially in the more recent year or two. Since that in February 2020, the resolution was passed to go for net zero by 2030 by General Synod. And that has really bolstered the strength of that team, and the second person has been added. And it's clear that their influence in the rest of the Church of England has also gone up 2 or 3 notches, and they're much more effective in getting things done. So you'll have noticed that if you look at the parish buying things on the Church of England, a lot of that's now to do with the environment. If you look at the buildings website, a lot of that is now to do with the environment. There are all these webinars that have already been mentioned a couple of times about getting your, well, different things that can be done to get towards net zero. And there's some very good resources there. There's a really good thing which I'd recommend, practical steps towards net zero. It's 2 sides of A4, quite dense, but it's really good practical information about the sensible next steps that your church might take in getting towards net zero. And these things are on the church care part of the website under the environmental programme, the Church of England website. And another thing that the Church of England's got very involved with is campaigns. So in particular, in recent years, we've had the Lent 2019 campaigns on the environment. The big initial campaign was about divestment. And that's developed into the Transition Pathway Initiative, which has been a hugely influential project. There's $25 trillion worth of assets, trillion, not billion, $25 trillion worth of assets aligned with that program now. So where investors are saying to companies, we want to see your program for moving to a low carbon world. We want to see your transition path. And if you can't show a decent transition path, we'll have got to start thinking about disinvesting from your company. So that's been a hugely influential thing. New things are always coming up, more and more attention now on farming and land management. It's realised that this is a very significant part of the C of E's carbon footprint. And the current big campaign is all about Climate Sunday, encouraging us all to have Climate Sunday services before 6th of June, before 5th of September, and building our awareness about the COP26 summit in Glasgow in November. Also the G7 in Cornwall in June, also very significant. So just talk a little bit about the Church of England Birmingham. So Bishop David takes climate change extremely seriously, well, the environment in general extremely seriously, and writes about it often. And he chairs personally the Church of England Environmental Board that we now have. This will manage all the different initiatives in the diocese on the environment. And the main one is the so-called NZEG project, the Net Zero Environment Group. So Daniel Mays is the property director, chairs that group. So he's exactly the right person because he really understands the buildings and has responsibility for the buildings. And this is where our carbon footprint comes in. But of course, the diocese is actually only a small part of our footprint. Schools are a very big part and parishes are a big part. And the diocese only has indirect control over schools and parishes. You know, it's boards of governors and PCCs who really control those things. So a lot of what we've to do as a diocese is about influencing, helping and supporting parishes and schools on their net zero journey, and also on other environmental things to do with, for example, biodiversity. I think I'm running out of time, but I just want to say how much things have changed. I started in 2012, and the Environment Group had been running a long time already in the C of E nationally. But in recent years, it's got bigger and stronger and more supported, and its influence is more, and the more resources. And it's unbelievable, the change. And as I say, I think a particular sea change happened when the February 2020 net zero motion was passed by General Synod. But it's not just the church that's changed so much. I think the UK government, I mean, we've got a Conservative government at the moment, who you might consider to be the most cynical on climate change issues. But actually, their programme is very impressive and very ambitious. And I think there's the fact that we've got COP26 happening in Glasgow really means there's an opportunity to push forward in this country with the importance of addressing climate change. And I think another big change has been the investment world, where now it really is commonplace for investors to expect to see a transition to a low carbon economy, to expect to see a plan for that, a high level plan of how that will be achieved. That's now a very routine expectation, whereas not long ago that was a rather novel idea. And I think in a funny way, COVID has helped as well, because COVID has taught us that worldwide problems affect all of us, and that you can't hide away from them. And I think that there's a mentality now that to address climate change, we have to have this worldwide mentality. And we can't pretend it's everyone else's problem, but we all have to get involved with that. So I'm very encouraged by those changes happening at this time. And I think I've gone over my time, so I better shut up.
You have, but it's been very interesting, Patrick, and very important. And thank you very much for that contribution. And just to underline what you've said, and to pull a couple of things together, Climate Sunday is indeed a way of speaking out. One of its asks is to speak out, and to speak out to the government, very simply by clicking a button and giving your support, both as an individual and as a church, to the endeavour at COP26. And that kind of draws some of those things you've been saying, I think, together, because it's important to move from the committee room to action, and to get the churches and the government's policies, really making change. We've got, Beryl, we're going to go over a couple of minutes, but I can't resist taking a couple of questions from the chat because they're so interesting. Is that okay, Beryl? Can we just go over 2 or 3 minutes? She's muted. I'm going to take that as a yes. Patrick, I'm just going to the chat here. Patrick, from Shamsi, with regard to climate change in Malawi and flooding and drought in particular, could the government of Malawi invest in drainage systems alongside better weather forecasts to curb weather issues that could harm people and wildlife, to protect its economy? Probably, actually, that's not one for Patrick, that's one for Paul, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, influence on government to change those kind of things.
The trouble is with Malawi, it's a very poor country and the government has no money. It's so heavily dependent upon overseas support. So, yeah, really difficult for them to invest in anything. I mean, putting it mildly, COVID has put a real dampener on the economy in the last 12 months and made life even harder. So I'm afraid not much good looking to the government for much support over there.
Interesting, of course, that's such a systemic thing, and it's how far the church itself can use its influence over these systemic problems a bit, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just going to move on just quickly. Final question that's come through on the chat, and this is for you, Patrick. Should the diocese unlock its financial reserves to support investment in carbon reduction initiatives in poorer churches in Birmingham? I think I know what the answer to that is, and I would ask, what about richer churches coughing up a bit for poorer ones? Patrick, that whole thing about sharing the cash.
Yes, I'm not sure. As we know, the diocese has a very difficult financial situation at the moment in general. Something that I think does have a potential is to consider investments in, for example, solar panels, for example, things that would have a payback. Seems to me that the diocesan investments, if we could make a secure investment in something like a solar panel on a church roof, that might work properly as an investment, and it would certainly work as an environmental contribution. And it would mean that our financial resources were being aligned with what we're trying to do in terms of mission. So that's something that I have tried to work on a little bit with the finance department. Unfortunately, the good lady moved on, didn't she? The director of finance, Mrs. Crooks, moved on. So, I have to start again on that conversation.
Indeed, and actually it is interesting, isn't it, Patrick, that where we put our money and discussions about money become once again a very important kind of gospel conversation around all of this. I mean, there's lots now coming through. I think we probably ought to stop because we're slightly over time now. And Beryl, you want to say one or two concluding things, I think. So I'm going to wind up, sadly, from all these chat questions now and pass over to you, Beryl.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you for doing your bit, which actually is really very good of you. Yeah, it's a shame this is coming to an end because I think we've got so many questions we would really like to address. So we will be saving from the chat, and hopefully we can actually get the right people to give some answers, which we can actually circulate. I hope that doesn't cause too much trouble to the speakers that we've had, but I think we would try to do that for you, because otherwise I'd be very inclined to say let's run over, but it's not a good idea. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. I hope that you've actually gone away with some useful ideas, and hopefully you feel inspired to actually hold a Climate Sunday service, and equally to inspire other churches in your neighbourhood to do something similar, because that is really so important and a role that we can all play. I also have to say thank you very much for the rest of the people from Bracher who've been actually organising and talking in the series, as well as our guest speakers, and the guest speakers, of course, who aren't actually here tonight, but hopefully they can somehow by over the ether get that message as well. So I think that's it really. So it's good night and thank you very much indeed. And Patrick's put his hand up.
Well, that's meant to be a clap.
Sorry.
I think on behalf of the diocese, and not probably on behalf of everyone present, I'd like to thank Bracher for these courses. I think there have been 4 in this series, and I do think they've been enormously helpful, and I do think it's a great thing to help the whole diocese, and increasingly there's emphasis on this in the deaneries, and I think gone over time once, you shouldn't go. Thank you very much to Bracher for organising it all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we must be the worst one we've had ever interrupted. Anyway, thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.